There we go. Now we're recording. Okay, and like again, if you have not muted yourself, please do so so that we can all hear what the presentation. Okie dokie. So this, and I'm going to go ahead and continue to share. So a little bit of our agenda, right? Who I am, why we're here. We're going to talk a little bit about theory. Those of you who are in classes may know that why, that some of the important theories that go into why we do what we do. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what is anti-bias education, what is anti-racism, and how do we integrate this with teaching. And then I'm going to ask you all to help me talk about how do we talk about this topic with parents, and then we'll go into questions. Okay. So that's pretty much our agenda, and we're going to try to tackle it as soon as we can, but at a certain pace. Okay. Apologies. So a little bit about who I am. This is me. I'm an assistant professor at Pierce College in the Child Development Department. I'm also part of PEACH, which is a advocacy group, and I work on the doctoral and co-lead on the equity working group. I'm a mother also of 2 children, one who is an LAUSD kindergartner and a 4-year-old who's in preschool. And I have been a ECE teacher and director for many years, and now in the community college field and working with students such as many of you in this room are students who are learning as well. And the pictures that you see are kind of what fuels me. The top picture, if you see it, is a picture of Martin Luther King as discussed in my daughter's TK class. And if anybody want to write in the chat something you notice about Martin Luther King, anybody want to kind of venture? Anything you noticed about who he looks like? He was a leader of the Black community, sure. Anything you noticed about the pictures, though? He looks like George Washington. Thank you, Donna. Hi, Donna. By the way, I didn't see you before. Depicted with an oval face, wearing a tie. They all look the same. Ding, ding, ding. Christian's the winner. They all look the same. And so this is part of, like I said, what fuels me is that I don't want education for our kids about a really important leader, as noted before, to be something that you just kind of cut out a circle, make a little face, put some hay on it, and put a tie on it, and that's the learning. Make sense? That's not the learning for me. The learning is more about what did he do? How did he impact us? What did he do to change us? And Donna, thank you. So the bottom picture, thank you, Donna, is also of my kid, but of George Washington. And again, the learning there is that it's kind of fun and frivolous, and we all make the same hat. We all have the little curly, the cotton beard. And we're learning about George Washington, but we're not learning everything about him, which is that there are some things that he did that were not so great. And part of what we're going to talk about today is being kind of going outside the box of not just thinking about what we're comfortable talking about, but going to all of those things. But thank you, Donna, for bringing that to our attention. So apologies. So I think I already asked you all to introduce yourselves, but if you did not, please do so, because it's part of how we're taking attendance, but also how I get to know you and what your where you are from and where you are in this journey. So if you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, please go ahead and do so. I see a lot of people, like the previous people are somebody from Epic Consulting, someone else from NHA San Diego, Compton College, LACCD student, great. Pierce, yay, Pierce, Compton, San Diego, Mesa College, awesome. So again, if you haven't already introduced yourself, please do. So it seems like we have a number of students, some people in education, and a few that are from different other teaching fields. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so as we begin today, I want you to think about yourself, and these are some guidelines for processing our information. So what inspires us, how we can kind of work together. So if some of the information today is feeling a little bit different or discomforting, just know that that's okay and that's part of the learning. So set your own boundaries for sharing. If you don't feel comfortable sharing, you don't have to. Speak from your experience. Try not to generalize about groups of people. Listen respectfully. Focus on your own learning. Keep in mind that discomfort, disequilibrium, right, Piaget, is a part of our growth and transformation process. And thinking about yourself as an educator and who you the children, try to remain open. So these guidelines are adapted from the Anti-Racist Collective out of the University of South Carolina. And so I wanted to just share those with you all today so that if you are, again, feeling uncomfortable or not really sure how to share, you can kind of refer back to these. Okay. 2 guiding questions I wanted to, sorry, before I move on, does anybody have any questions about that? No, we have some wonderful introductions. Great. Okay. So 2 guiding questions that are taken from Dora Pulindo Tabassian and Janet Gonzalez Mena are, what does it mean to be a parent raising a child in this diverse world? And what does it mean to be a young child growing up in this diverse world? So think about those 2 things for a second. What does it mean for our children to be growing up in this diverse world? And what does it mean to be for a parent, and what does it mean for a child? And I think we often forget those messages. We think about our own kind of our own dynamics of what it means for me to be a teacher, but we're not really thinking about how do we talk about this with family members, or how do we talk about this with other children. I'm really seeing a little bit of feedback. If anybody would mind muting if you're not already muted. I'm just going to. There we go. Thank you for your patience. I was trying to make sure I muted people, not because I don't want to hear you eventually, but because it's hard to listen over the feedback. Okay. So as I was saying, these are 2 guiding questions for us to think about, and because it helps us remember who we're talking to and why we're going to be talking about these topics. So a little bit of theory. So those of you who remember your Child Development 1 classes, if you're at the community college level, theory. Bronfenbrenner. So those of you who may have seen my presentation in the fall, I also use Bronfenbrenner. I feel like you can't really talk about young children and what's happening with them in this world right now, in this diverse world, in this new world, without thinking about where they are and their systems of development. So we're looking at the child, right, as the center, and their microsystem, their immediate environment, right? The connections they've made in their mesosystem, as well as their indirect environment, which is a lot of what we're talking about right now, the media, and how that influences our teaching, how that influences parents. There was no way to shield, there was a way, but there wasn't a lot of ways to shield our kids from what was happening last summer. It impacted all of us with the murder of George Floyd. It was a public video that was published online, and it really impacted a lot of people. And it really put forth the Black Lives Matter protests, and it was really front and center of what was happening. And so, as you may have recalled, Sesame Street and other media sources started to put out, anti-racism or standing up to racism specials that were really interesting, important. I don't think they had been done the same way before. And so what I want to say to you now is that this is how it's impacting our children. It's become that message that we all need to continue to carry forth. And it's part of our chrono system. And if you're not familiar with the chrono system, it is that change, that memory time, change over time that will take us on for a long time. So young children may not remember what it was like my son, who was 3.5 when this was all happening. He may not remember, but he definitely is going to remember listening to Sesame Street and the standing up for racism. Maybe when he's older, he'll recall, oh, that was why we were watching that. Okay. My daughter remembers this as well. What remembers that we talked a lot about this, and we read a lot of stories about these not about the events, but about things that were related to it. And again, this is just something that to be thinking about is how does this impact us in terms of what are we sharing with children and how are we sharing it? Just checking the chat to make sure. Renee, thank you. Okay, so as we move forward, I want you all in the chat. I'm going to ask you to just do a little bit of homework. You don't have to do a lot, just a little bit. Thinking about your own, that word bias. Before we even get to what anti-bias is, I want you all to talk about what is bias. So if you could in the chat, write a word or a phrase that comes to mind when you are thinking about that word bias. Oh, we already have some, thank you. Skewed, prejudice, harmful, race, unfair, unconscious, not included, discriminatory, your ideas leaning one way or the other. These are really excellent, you guys. If I had more time, I would put them all in a word doodle. Favoritism, primarily a negative thought or connotation against a person, race, or product. Good. Wow. You should be teaching me. I am learning so much from you all. Race and ideas that lean one way or another. Excellent. You guys are right on this. And I'm really grateful that you're all on this journey with me because it makes me feel like that this is an important topic that you all want to tackle. So what is bias? According to one definition, prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Okay, so you are all right on it, right? A prejudice in favor of one thing versus another. If I am only wearing white and someone else is only wearing black, and I say you can only the people that are wearing white can come play with me, that is a bias and leads to prejudice and leads me to compare others or treat others unfairly. Okay, so the anti-bias approach, and some of you might be familiar with this already, but and oh, sorry, Heather just said everyone has them. This is absolutely true. Unfortunately, we all have bias, but it is how we use our biases that is what is going to kind of, or how we decide to treat those biases that is going to lead us to hopefully better things eventually. So the anti-bias approach, if you can see here on the side, is a curriculum that was brought forth by Louise Derwin Sparks and Julie Olson Edwards. And it asks us to calls on teachers to gently but firmly intervene, support the child who has been hurt by biased behavior, help children learn other ways of interacting, and it is necessary as a partner of conflict resolution. This is according to the National Association for the Education of Young Children. One of the important elements of it, according to Janet Gonzalez-Mena, is it involves cross-cultural communication, also negotiating cultural differences, and that we should be looking at bias through issues of class as well as privilege. So part of it is examining your own privilege. If you are someone who is privileged either in the way that you look, race, or your education. I am privileged in that I am a doctorate of education. That is an important part of my identity, but also something that I'm privileged to have, and that I am aware that not everybody had that same experience as me. And so if I was to look at everything from one perspective, I could look at it as everyone should have the same education as me, no question. But I can look at it also as it's important that I have that education and that I share my knowledge and my understanding with others and have empathy as well. That's just an example. So again, this is adapted from Janet Gonzalez-Mena, and I'll be sharing all these slides right after the presentation. So please do not feel like you have to write down everything. If that's the kind of person you are, please do. Just don't want you to feel like I'm going too fast. So why do we focus on bias? And as I think Heather said before, yes, Heather said everyone has them. Absolutely. It's natural. And of course, children, they are natural things that we all say. children they say things like, I don't like you because you have this type of shirt, right? That might be a bias that they're showing. But it is bad for our kids, and it's bad for us as adults. It harms our self-esteem, it sucks our energy, it disempowers, it discriminates. I don't have to go over this list for you. You understand that these are not good things for us to have. And one of the tenets of our biases are to commit yourself to education, to commit yourself to saying, I have those biases and therefore I'm going to educate myself so that I can do more to counter them. Okay. And so again, that focus on bias is because we know that this is what's bad for our kids and this is what's hard. Again, within our anti-bias education, we want to focus on helping children understand and value that there's the cultural pluralism, which essentially is that we sometimes have more than one culture. You might have your home culture and you might have your school culture. You might have the culture that you were born with and the culture that you that is part of the school system that you're in. And you want to work on your own ethnocentrism, right? Communicate with others and accept other realities as valid and model your own bicultural experience. So again, back when this was first developed by Louise Durbin Sparks and others, we were looking at this from a lens of, we want to fight this, we want to encounter it. And a lot of this is about kind of being aware and being understanding, right? Any questions about this so far? Oh, thank you. And Jessica said, our kids are egocentric. It's a great point. Sorry, I'm not getting to all the comments quickly enough. My apologies. If our kids are egocentric and they're only thinking about themselves, then of course they're naturally going to demonstrate biases. And so I think that's what Jessica's trying to convey. And so it's our job to say, we're going to be working on being inclusive, and we're going to make sure that everyone that has a yellow shirt is also included in the activities the red shirts are doing, or whatever it is, right? That's just an analogy. And thank you, Deborah, who said, we need to be aware of them and work to counteract the ones that are prejudicial and harmful. Okay, there's one more slide on anti-bias. Yes, so again, our anti-bias educators are telling us that instead of just disregarding differences by not talking about them, we celebrate them. We bring culture into children's lives. We are aware of stereotypes and fantasy. We are aware of privilege and power. We want to make sure that we're about and addressing. Somebody is also not on mute again. Don't forget to mute yourself if you can. Thank you. Okay, and are teaching our children to respond positively to difference. And so again, I don't have any issue with anti-bias education, and I actually think it's a really positive thing to think about this in terms of anti-bias. However, in our timeline, in my opinion, in our timeline of learning about bias and race, we're moving forward and we're evolving, in my opinion. Now, this is not necessarily documented, but we're not saying anti-bias education isn't important. What we are saying is it is important, but we're moving towards something else that's bigger, because what's been happening in our society, in our country, is getting harder and harder to just dismiss with anti-bias education. We have to work harder and do more. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so that I can take you to a video. 1 second.
So I have a question for you.
Apologies. If you have seen this video, you are welcome to share, but can everybody see? Put the captioning on.
Are you?
Okay. Can everybody see the video? Vanessa and Joe, because you're the first people I see, can you just give me a thumbs up if you see the words, "Are you racist?" Great, thank you so much.
So I have a question for you. Are you non or are you anti? Several months ago, in response to Ferguson, Baltimore, the killings of Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice, my friend Caitlin put up a Facebook post breaking down the difference between non-racism and anti-racism. Most of us are non-racist. Because racism is looked upon as some moral lapse, we feel quite self-assured by simply not being racist. I'm not a bigot. I don't sing that N-worm when my favorite rap jam comes on. I didn't vote for that guy. I'm not burning any crosses. I'm not a skinhead. I don't, I won't, I'm not, I've never, I can't. What you end up with is an entire moral stance, an entire code for living your life and dealing with all the injustice in the world by not doing a damn thing. That's the great thing about none. You can pull it off by simply rolling over in your bed and going to sleep. So why are you sitting at home and watching things unfold on TV instead of doing something about it? Because you're a non-racist, not an anti-racist. Now do this for me. Take the C out of racist and replace it with a P. I'm not a rapist. I'm not friends with any rapist. I didn't buy that rapist last album. All these things that you're not doing. Meanwhile, people are still getting raped and Black boys are being killed. It's not enough that you don't do these things. You're going to bed with a clear conscience is not going to stop college students from getting assaulted. You thinking climate change is terrible is not going to stop climate change. You being so assured that you're not anti-Black, anti-Muslim won't stop the next hate crime. And it's wonderful that you recognize how brave gay people are when facing persecution, but they aren't the ones who need to be brave. We need to get active. We need to hold people accountable. We need to accept that what hurts one of us hurts all of us. And we need to stop thinking that injustice going on in the world isn't to an extent our fault. We need to stop being none and start being anti.
Racism is a business. For centuries, it has underpinned global economic exploitation. And like any successful business idea, it needs great marketing, PR, and advertising.
Okay, so I know that was pretty heavy for a Monday. So in the chat, I know somebody said yikes. Or no, they were saying yes, my apologies. So I'm seeing some very good video, some comments about that. Let me just make sure I'm actually sharing my video. Can you guys see this or no, not yet? Hang on. My apologies, I did not re-share the screen. So yes, this is an important video and one that I feel like you have to demonstrate or show in order to to be able to have this conversation about race and whether you are anti-racist or not. So questions or comments, anything, anybody kind of was important to anyone, and I know it's a few years old, but I still feel like it's very relevant. It's talking about Ferguson. Yes, the link for the video will be shared. Actually, I can put it somewhere in the, I can put it in the chat before the end if you remind me. Okay, other questions. How do you know that you're being anti-racist? Great question, Ryan. So we're going to kind of move into that. So thank you. And Sabrina says it's hard. I've heard it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist. That's exactly right. So again, I want to just make sure that I'm very clear. I am not saying that anti-bias education is not important. I'm just saying that we're moving through that. We're using those tools and utilizing them and moving forward with being an anti-racist educator. Okay, so I believe that it was Angela Davis that first talked about the word anti-racist, but Abraham X. Kendi, who says, when we choose to be anti-racist, we become actively conscious about race and racism and take actions to end racial inequalities in our daily lives. So again, we're not just having conversations. We are thinking about it, and we're taking it's for me humbly, it has been taking over my entire life, where I think about the things that I buy, the toys that my children are using, the ideas that I share with my classes. So for example, I've always shared this one video about education in our country, and it's from a white male. And it's a really great video from a very important educator. And then I realized that I was sort of skewing the opinions that we're listening to. And so I found one of someone else who also had a voice and also has something to say. Maybe didn't have all the same titles as this one particular educator, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear that I'm not just going to be teaching the same content every year with the same information. I'm trying to get my students to think about how to consciously take these ideas and utilize them in their everyday lives. So I want to just make sure I look at this. There's a few comments in the chat. So someone saying, why should we choose anti-racism? Well, it's sort of what the video speaks to, is that we have to choose it actively in order to tackle it in our everyday lives. So it isn't about us saying, oh, I'm anti-racist, and then going about your business when you see something happening on the street to someone else that appears to be a microaggression, or someone saying something that's not kind to someone of color, but then treating you fairly because you're not a person of color. Does that make sense? So it's about choosing to kind of fight those fights in your everyday life and your everyday ideas. So I think I answered that question as best as I could. Why should we choose anti-racism? And someone, Bristol says, there was a moment in a classroom when I heard something that was not all right in an after-school program. I brought the students to the site director to repeat what was said, and we even spoke with the parent about what was said, and the parent didn't understand what was wrong with what was said. And that's exactly right. Those are the types of, I want to say battles, but those are the types of things that we want to call out when we see it, because the next time maybe that person won't use that same language. And if they do, you have that recollection of saying, remember the last time we had this conversation, this was really uncomfortable for this child. Or it's being able to kind of stop yourself and say, this felt really, bringing it to the child and saying, how did it make you feel? And if they said, I felt like that wasn't treating me fairly, or I felt like that made me feel uncomfortable. I'm using those words and being able to articulate that, we did something that was not right for this particular child and that particular thing. So thank you for sharing that, Ursula. Esmeralda's asking, is teaching your children to be non-racist and anti-racist? Not sure if that question makes sense. Well, again, I think we're continuing that discussion of using the word anti-racist. We are trying to infuse that in our language and in our culture so that we don't continue to have these issues persist. This is an ongoing fight. It may not be solved in my lifetime, hopefully in some of yours, but I want to make sure that I'm doing my best every day for the children and families I work with, and I want to make sure you all have the tools that you need. Someone is quoting Haile Selassie. Throughout history, it has been the inaction of those who could not be acted, and the indifference of those who should have known better. The silence of the voice of justice when it mattered. Thank you so much for sharing that. So yes, sitting back and just for that educator earlier who spoke up and said something or brought it to the attention of someone, if you hadn't brought it to the attention and just sort of like said, oh, he didn't mean what he said, that's not taking that action that we need, right? But taking that action is really important. And Deborah's right. We need to call these things out, respect the truth and experience of our Black and Brown students, our LGBTQ+ students, and other marginalized populations. Yes. So, so that's primarily the message. I'm going to keep going because there's other resources I want to share, but I'm so excited that you are also actively sharing these things in the chat. And I want to make sure that I give us time to kind of also have a dialogue about it. Okay. So this is the primary graphic that I really love to show my students as well as other parents. When we say to each other, when do we talk about it? And we always say, well, they're too young to know. And believe it or not, by the time our kids are 5, it's too late to start having those conversations. We need to begin the conversations early. And so this graphic, which is by, as you can see at the very bottom, the Children's Community School in Philadelphia, at birth, we notice that babies are looking equally at faces of all races, right? By the time they are about 2, right? They use race to reason about people's behaviors, believe it or not. These are tested theories that our psychologists in the field have looked at. And by 30 months, they're choosing who to play with based on what they look like. Okay, so we are seeing that these expressions of racial prejudice show around 4 or 5. And so again, this is why this is so important for us to be thinking about how do we talk to our kids about this? We don't just gloss it over. We don't just say, oh, let's be nice to everyone, or, oh, let's make sure that we're, inviting all the kids to the class party. We're infusing it in everything we do. And so for me, being an anti-racist educator, anti-racist parent is about adopting this philosophy of, I'm going to make this a part of everything I do in my everyday life. I don't know how to explain it other than that, because standing back and just watching something happen is uncomfortable. And standing back and watching something happen in front of a child is equally as uncomfortable. But standing up and saying, that didn't feel okay, or I didn't like the way that you said that to me, or however you want to express it, it's hard. You have to find your voice, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. Oh, somebody wants to say something maybe, or maybe accidentally took themselves off mute. Okay. Yes, so Carmen is, so I'm going to go back to what some of the other people are saying in the chat. Our education starts at home and our parents are first teachers. Esmeralda said yes, and I think that was in response to this graphic. Education starts at home and our parents are the first teachers. Eileen says she agrees, and whatever parents teach their children, they observe. Yes, they are watching us. They notice that we treat certain people differently than others. We need to be careful how we act around children because they are watching us, yes. So we've got a lot of agreement. And it's okay to disagree, but just make sure that we know that that uncomfortableness is okay too. So this is another video of how, actually, there's a few things in this slide. One is one of the best ways to think about how to infuse these ideas in your classroom as a teacher is to look at children's books. So you're checking for illustrations, you're checking the storylines, you're looking at the lifestyles. So you're not just including just only books with one demographic. So I like to think about this in terms of fathers too, not just mothers, right? So are you including books that have stories about fathers and their children? Or are you just including families that are a family of 4, mother, father, sister, and brother, right? So being inclusive with all of the books that you choose. And it's okay to note the heroes. I know we try to think about books in terms of, are we just having books about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, or are we also thinking about like everyday heroes, as I like to call them, right? Consider the effect on a child's self-image, the way that children are portrayed, how they're looked at. The author's perspective, is the author a child? Is the author a parent? What are we looking at there? Watch for loaded words. If you feel like this is a book you wouldn't include in your classroom for whatever reason, take it out, put it up on a shelf. If you feel like it's, it's maybe skewed in a certain way. And then of course, looking at the copyright dates, because some of our books are maybe outdated. They're not as inclusive as we want them to be. And maybe the message wasn't intended to be negative, but it's not necessarily great. Okay, so Ryan is asking again, why should we be anti-racist? I think we sort of talked about that. How can we tell others that being racist is bad? Aren't concepts of good and bad misconstrued and subjective? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So why should you be anti-racist? I think it's a question of preference, right? If you feel like that's a word that you feel like you want to embody, I think that's a really great quality. If you feel like it's a little bit hard yet and you're not ready to have that conversation, and remember what we said about the disequilibrium, right? That if you're feeling uncomfortable, that's okay, because that's sometimes where growth happens. I don't think that we're telling people that being racist is bad necessarily. I'm not going to ever say that to a parent. It's like being racist is bad. What I am going to say is I'm going to look to be more inclusive in the ways that I raise my child. We are going to be having conversations about skin tone and color and the way that people talk, and whether they have an accent or not, and what that means. And is that okay to make someone feel bad about the way they look, the way they talk, the way they dress, right? Those are the conversations we should be having. And you're right, they're subjective, but if this is an uncomfortable topic, again, that's okay. And for me, I don't know if I'm ever going to say that racism isn't bad, because I've been the subject of disparaging comments based on my last name, based on my family and where my family's from. And so I'm never going to feel like that's an okay thing for me personally. But that's, again, everyone is entitled to have a different opinion. This is just one way of looking at this. Deborah's saying, from anti-racist moves us, sorry, I skipped a comment. Eileen says, this is already happening in the history and the roots have been strongly grown, hard to change, and it won't happen immediately. Really great. Uh-oh. Don't forget to mute yourselves. Really great point. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not saying, I'm not saying you're waking up tomorrow and it's all going to be gone. We're saying, let's have these conversations and let's keep infusing these ideas in our kids as we work to create as stronger educators. And Deborah's saying anti-racism moves the social permission to behave in that manner. So yeah, it's not appropriate to demean or dismiss someone because of their skin color or culture. In the chat, I want you all to think about this word, this phrase, what are you? Has anyone in the chat ever been asked, what are you? For me, I'm gonna raise my hand. Would anybody else wanna either say yes or yes? Few, yes, 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 yes. Yes, from I always answer human. Thank you, Christian. Why are you Black? Interesting. Yes, I'm a human. Good. Or they ask, are you? Yes. Does it feel good when someone says, what are you? You are white, you must glow in the dark. No, a lot of people are saying no, it doesn't feel good. Rocio, thank you. No, but where are you really from? I get asked that all the time. I always say, what do you mean? Like I'm a student. Good. I'm a human. Okay. So it doesn't feel good when we are asked that. Yes, you're right. I get asked that the same. You're white, but you're Mexican. Right, because when in the Census Bureau, we have, or you have to check off white and that you are, yes, I say I'm a person. I always say I'm an American. That always gets people. Yes, you're not Mexican. You have green eyes, right, Christian? Same. I don't have green, but they're lighter. And I always say, remember that Mexican means mixture, right? We're a mixture of people. Okay, so my point with this is that first of all, as we said before, this isn't going away overnight. And also, we know that these are really hard topics for people to come by. So if any of you raised your hand or said, yes, I feel uncomfortable when someone says, what are you? Then this is what we're moving towards. We're moving towards being able to, for people to say, I didn't like the way that felt, right? And does it matter where I come from, or is it more important that I'm a person and I'm here and then I'm here to share with you today? Does it matter if I am look the way that I look, have this last name, and I can sit at this restaurant? Or I sit in the bus anywhere I want, buy a house, etc. So when we say those things, I feel like we are continuing to, when we say those things, when we are asked those questions, we are being othered. And when we are othered, we don't always feel great. And so we're trying to take away the otherness of that. And this is beyond celebrating it, because at this point, we're not celebrating it if we're being othered. We're being called out and made to feel like we don't belong. And that's the entire point of this, is that's what being an anti-racist is about, is saying, where you're from is important, but it's important because I wanted to get to know you. It isn't necessarily about celebrating the fact that you're other, or that you had to take a citizenship test, or that you have to show your passport and have your fingerprints done every time you enter into this country. So it's not an easy topic. And again, if you're confused or wondering why this topic, it's because that's hopefully where we're moving and where we want to address these things that are important to our kids. Okay, a few more comments. I'm a person, you're not Mexican, you have green eyes. Yes, next time I will say I am you. How do we say someone's national origin without saying what are you? Great question, Mike. You can just, I think that sometimes the what are you sounds like it's being a microaggression, right? Where it's like a little bit of an other. So you're welcome to, once you get to know someone, you can say, what is your heritage? Good. Or let's see, what else? Anybody have other suggestions? What's your cultural heritage? Sometimes I use the word ancestors because I had a family member that used to talk about their ancestors all the time. They where are your ancestors from? I'm interested in learning more about different cultures. Will you be willing to share? A wonderful idea. What are the choices when I like to say, what are the choices? And then they have to provide options. What is your background, right? So background, I think, is a little bit different than what are you, which again, kind of others you, right? Just depends on who you're being asked. Yes, thank you so much, Mike. So Mike saying, I was being asked that and realized that people sometimes just want to be more connected and know more about me. Absolutely. Often that is the case, but sometimes again, it's about the way we ask it. And if you're being asked that in a context that makes you feel uncomfortable in a room full of people that don't look like you, then that may feel different. Yes, good point, Rocio. It's like, what are you is weird. It's like being asked a pet or your breed. Really important point. Thank you so much for making that. Okay, so I'm not sure if I answered that question that Ryan was asking earlier, but I hope that that was helpful. That we're trying to move beyond just, racism is bad and try to connect us in ways that make more sense for us. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I want you all to see the video on the Anti-Racist Baby. And then we'll go back to some of those other resources there.
If you
Sorry, folks.
are a woman who is a VP, senior VP, director, CEO, or company founder.
Okie dokie. My apologies for the ad. And again, this book is written by Ibram X. Kendi. He wrote it for his daughter, I believe, and it just came out this past summer. And it's going to be read to us by an actor who some of you may or may not recognize.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of Sankofa Read Aloud.
This is not the one I thought it was, but we'll go ahead and start.
Today's story is titled Anti-Racist Baby, written by Ibram X. Kendi, illustrated by Ashley Lukashevsky. I hope that you enjoy this amazing story. Anti-Racist Baby is bred, not born. Anti-Racist Baby is raised to make society transform. Babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There's no neutrality. Take these 9 steps to make equity a reality. Number 1, open your eyes to all skin colors. Anti-Racist Baby learns all of the colors, not because race is true. If you claim to be colorblind, you deny what's right in front of you. Number 2, use your words to talk about race. No one will see racism if we only stay silent. If we don't name racism, it won't stop being so violent. Number 3, point at policies as the problem, not the people. Some people get more while others get less because policies don't always grant equal access. Number 4, shout, there's nothing wrong with the people. Even though all races are not treated the same, we are all human. Anti-Racist Baby can proclaim. Number 5, Celebrate all our differences. Anti-Racist Baby doesn't see certain groups as better or worse. Anti-Racist Baby loves a world that's truly diverse. Number 6, knock down the stack of cultural blocks. Anti-Racist Baby appreciates how groups speak, dance, and create as they choose. Anti-Racist Baby welcomes all groups voicing their unique views. Number 7, confess when being racist. Nothing disrupts racism more than when we confess the racist ideas that we sometimes express. Number 8, grow to be an anti-racist. Anti-Racist Baby is always learning, changing, and growing. Anti-Racist Baby stays curious about all people and isn't all knowing. Number 9, believe we shall overcome racism. Anti-Racist Baby is filled with the power to transcend, my friend, and doesn't judge a book by its cover, but reads until the end.
Sorry, I lost you guys for a second. Apologies. Took me a minute to come back. So before I go back to sharing my slides, how did that feel to listen to it in that context? Okay, I had a few oh, Ryan liked you like the confess when you're being racist part. Great. Nice book for kids to start understanding, right? You felt uncomfortable. Okay. Do you want to share more about that? You're welcome to unmute if you want.
Oh yeah, so I felt uncomfortable when they said, express yourself when you're being racist, because I feel like during our generation and our time, it's very difficult to express ideas that aren't generally accepted.
Right. That's
So
a good.
we're afraid to get canceled, or afraid to get negative backlash. But I feel like the only way we can actually deal with racism is by being honest. But it's hard to be honest when we're constantly being judged by others. So that's why it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable.
I think that's a really great point. Nobody in this room, in this Zoom, is getting canceled. Let me just say that. This is a safe place as of right this second. I know that some people don't like that feeling of it's a safe place. I had this conversation with my sister that we're not supposed to say that. But for this moment in time, I want you to all feel safe here. And I appreciate, Ryan, you being so honest and sharing that. But I think that the point we're trying to make, and that the book is trying to make, and that I'm trying to make, is that if we don't deal with our own discomfort first, then these issues become bigger, more problematic, harder to resolve, and become a little bit more uncomfortable. And I think in the beginning of the book, it said something too about if we don't talk about it, then it leads to violence. And I think that's one of the most profound pieces that I'm still learning about, right? Is that if we don't continue to have these really tough conversations, then we end up taking it out and become aggressive in ways that are not intended, that we shouldn't be doing, right? This happened a few months ago. And it continues to happen, I think, almost regularly with police brutality. It's really, concerning. There's a few people in the chat that I did not get to. But Ryan, again, I want to thank you for sharing and being so honest, because I know this is not an easy topic. Deborah says it's a hard idea to confess when we have trouble acknowledging when we're wrong. That's so true. As humans, it's hard for us to say, like, I was wrong. I didn't do the right thing there. And a lot of people are agreeing with you, Ryan. Eileen says that's true, and it's a good book for children and adults because it's easy to understand and has pictures. Great. Honest and open communications. Thank you. And yes, the ideas are that babies are not born racist. We do develop those ideas as we get older. And Heather, wonderful. I love that idea of like, you can confess by saying, I'm sorry and I'm still learning. I've done that myself. I didn't, oh, I think I said that word and I shouldn't have said it in that way. And I apologize and I'm still learning my own comfort level with some of these things, right? Deborah, I'm not sure about the safe space thing. I will look into that more, but my understanding is that not everybody feels safe, even when you say it's a safe space. It's a really heavy idea that I'm still learning to grapple with. It's like, if I say to you all, this is a safe space, and some of you still feel like you can't really share in this space, and I'm dictating that it's safe, not you. So, okay. Yes, thank you, Versal. So including our children in poverty who are treated poorly, right? So we're talking about the ideas here aren't just related to race. We are talking about marginalized people in general. People who have been treated differently or poorly because they don't have money, they don't come from the right country, they don't have the proper paperwork. But we're starting with anti-racism because this is at the root of lots of the deep-seated issues in this country. Does that make sense? It's not to say that my issue, your issue, our issues aren't important, but right in this moment in time, this is the one that's really important, and people are dying every day because. Okay. Racism if it's racism, I think she's asking, is racism change, the crime rate will decrease? I mean, that's a good point. If we decide to have these conversations more often, will the crime rate change? I would imagine it will, but I do think it needs to have, there's a lot of other factors that have to do with that. Okay, one more comment before I go back to the slides, if that's okay. We should be able to speak openly, especially because of most of the time our biased thoughts are rooted from what others taught us as children. That's actually true, right? I think this is back in response to what Ryan said. So yes, if your ideas and thoughts are rooted in how you were brought up and how you were raised, then it's okay to work with that and move with it and work past it. Does that make sense? I'm going to tell a really quick story, if that's okay. Because thank you, Claudia, you brought this back for me. My family is of Mexican origin. My family is from Texas, and I used to have my step-grandfather was Polish. He was not my father's father. He was our step-grandfather, and we loved him dearly. And he was a white man, and he said some disparaging things about other people of color, not Hispanic people, others. And I remember growing up with it and thinking it was strange, but also hearing my mother tell him to his face, we don't say that in front of the children. And so in her own way, she was being anti-racist. We didn't call it back then, but that's what she was being. And I was talking about it with my dad the other day about how he would say these disparaging things about people that were not in that demographic. And my dad was like, yeah, that was just the person he was, and that's how he grew up. Doesn't make it okay. No. And my mother did call him out and say, you might not say that in front of my children. And she was right to do so. And my brother and I still kind of, we don't laugh about it, but we still kind of, remember that, like, wow, that was somebody we grew up with who had these really poor ideas of other people from different communities. And then I would talk with my cousins about it, and my cousin would say, oh, he said far worse things in front of us. So my mother was doing that hard work of protecting us and also showing us that this was not okay. And meanwhile, he was saying really terrible things about other groups. And so we grew up with it as a side note. It wasn't okay. And it's something that's part of our story now, that we are acknowledging, like, wow, that was really big and deep, and he did that, and it wasn't cool. And was it generational? Maybe. Was it okay to break that down in front of us? Absolutely. really, and so yeah, it's for sure hard to stand up to. And so some of us, even in our own, you know, even some of us in our own background, right? My Mexican heritage, right, might have biases against others of us who are in that same demographic. And it's like, oh, the reason why we do things is because of this, right? So it's really not. This is very normal, and so I just want to applaud Ryan again for saying that this was uncomfortable, and also I want you to note that a lot of us, people are saying these in the chat. A lot of us have had these experiences where we grew up with someone who maybe wasn't the best figurehead for us, and we're learning still, and that's okay. And our children and generations after us are going to continue this journey. But if we don't stop some of those now, then it's going to get it's going to be even harder when they're older, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go back to that previous slide and share it with you again, and then we'll continue on this journey. Sorry, hang on one second. It's not working. There we go. I have the right screen. Okay. Can you guys still see that? I know it's a blurry video. So these are some of the tips and topics about how do we check for these type of books, etc. And so going back again to the previous slide, it's never going to be too young to talk about this. And we're going to do it in different kind of literally baby steps of how we identify, like, look at the different the skin tones. Do you notice the hair? And, you know, even doing the thing that we do as educators, like, you want to touch my hair? Is my hair different than your hair? Right? Giving them permission to do those things when you feel like it's important and necessary. And again, a lot of this is, unfortunately, some of it's going to be pre-COVID, right? That touching is I know, is something that we're still going to kind of getting used to as we get out of this. But in a typical classroom setting, you would be able to touch different things, right? Or even think about, you know, using baby dolls and or other materials that feel important and helpful. Okay. So other books that you might consider looking at, and this is the first one is is on the side, the I Am Enough book, Frybed, Mafaro's Beautiful Daughter. If you've ever read Hair Love, it's a really beautiful book about how we honor different hair. Always Anjali Sule. One of the ones that I wanted to bring up, I think, is on the next slide. Our Skin Between Us and Abuela, Alma, and How She Got Her Name. Anybody ever read Alma and How She Got Her Name? If you haven't, I'm not just saying it because it's my name, I'm saying it's because it's an amazing book about a little girl who has like 5 or 6 different names and how she was named after all these different family members. And she uses her imagination to imagine what they might have felt like and how they all sort of are a part of her. And so those of us who have many, many names or are named after different people that we've never met, it's a very especially poignant book. Okay, so more about what we can do. So again, I want to bring your attention to this book, Something Happened in Our Town. Anybody ever heard of it? If you haven't heard of this book, it's a really important one that I would highly recommend you check out. It's about basically about the kids realizing that there was police brutality that happened in their town. And they talk about it in a way that makes sense for kids. It basically is something to the effect of something happened in our town. The grown-ups don't think we know, but we know because they're all talking about it. Somebody was hurt and it was hurt by a policeman. And I'm confused because I thought policemen were supposed to be good. And so then the children, the white family talks about it at home, the Black family talks about it at home, and in having those discussions, it becomes really clear to the reader that The Black family is having a more descriptive discussion because it is about who they are and the way they look. And the white family has the same discussion. When they compare notes, the children realize that this would all be resolved in a way by having more conversations and being more inclusive. So it's a really important book. I think it's a tough book. It's not easy, but it's just as important, I would say, as I don't know, as any Dr. Seuss book, for example, right? It's not just important anymore that we read Dr. Seuss, it's important that we read these books and that we talk about this in ways that are important. Okay, so again, encourage play and learning around these hard topics. In some classrooms, you might have, intentional setup of like block areas or, art activities that feature, skin tone. Somebody mentioned the book Black is a Rainbow Color by Angela Joy. Thank you for sharing that.
Is it PERS or which one? What type of pension is it? Huh?
Are you asking a question?
Is it PERS?
Somebody's on.
Is it PERS or what kind of retirement system is it? According to public employment retirement.
I don't think that she's trying to ask the question.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, Dr. Alma. This is Yadira. I'm here to support you guys. I think maybe who spoke about the retirement? We have another workshop right now on the CalSTRS.
Oh, got it.
And so maybe is that person still here? If you can just put your email on the screen, I will redirect you to the correct Zoom link. Thank you. Sorry about that, Dr. Cortes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure everybody could hear.
Yes.
Okay, so a few questions. Okay, there's an email in the chat. That might be the person.
Got it.
Yeah. So we wanted to discuss our differences in concrete ways. So we're not just going to say, oh, no, color doesn't matter, or we don't see color here, right? That's the kind of the way that we're trying not to have these conversations. We don't want to default to the sample approach. And what I mean by that is in your school classroom, you are like, we're celebrating Cinco de Mayo and we're celebrating one Asian American holiday, and we're going to celebrate 4th of July. And when you're doing it in that way, right? And we're celebrating Black History Month, but you just do one activity. When you do it that way, it is more like a sample. Like when you're going to the buffet and you're just taking like your little piece of shrimp, some sushi here, a little bit of enchiladas, right? What you do is you get a little bit, but you don't get a lot of that. And the kids don't get as much. And so it becomes like those pictures I showed you in the beginning. Martin Luther King with a circle, right? That's not what you want. What you want is really authentically diving into these topics if you're going to do it. Commit to it, right? And someone says, when we have to see color in order to honor student lives and experiences and to honor their truth. Thank you, Deborah. Discuss differences in concrete ways. Okay, so that's what I mean is you can say, how we're not just saying, hey, I have different color hair than you. We're talking about it and saying, like, look at all the different people that have brown hair in this room. Think, what other hair color do you see? Right, with blonde, with brown, and so in concrete ways that, we can also talk about, right, the way that our eyes look, the way our skin tone is. When we back away from it, we don't discuss it, it often becomes, like I said, that muddy thing of like, oh yeah, everybody's the same. And that's not really true. We're not all the same, right? And so that's how we want to do it in concrete ways that are more, authentic, integrated. Having hard conversations. So when topics like children saying, I don't want to play with you because you have curly hair, or I don't want to play, only the girls can do this and only the boys can do that. So we are talking about anti-racist, but we're also talking about all of the other things that make us different. So, well, okay, if boys want to play with this and girls want to play with this, maybe we can have on maybe for 30 minutes, the boys can use this and then we'll let everybody else have a turn. So we're not going to say, no, you can't do that. You can say, well, if you guys want to have a turn on this, we can provide you with a time in a way that makes sense for that. Okay. But not just, again, glossing over it of like, oh, that's not nice. We don't do that. Well, the truth is children are going to do those things, right? They are going to say, I don't want to play with the girls, or I don't want to play with kids that have, dark skin. So tackling it and not just, again, not glossing over it and saying, we don't do that in this classroom. We have discussions and bring it back to the kids of like, how did that make you feel, Alma, when she said, I don't want to play with you because of the color of your skin? And I might say, well, I don't understand it because my skin's the same color as yours, right? So that kind of back and forth, if that makes sense. Okay. And learning those, right, knowing and that your own learning develops community and help us to understand where they are at in their learning. So we know that this is the type of thing that builds us and makes us stronger. And again, if we don't talk about it, then it becomes even harder to kind of discuss long-term. So I don't know if that's resonating for anyone. If it does, great. And if you still have questions, please let me know. Ryan has a question, which is, what are the reasons behind it and where does it come from? Anybody want to venture and ask that question or answer that question? What are the reasons behind it? Where does it come from? Is it biological? Anybody want to answer? Letitia's saying it's created to justify slavery. Deborah's saying similarly, it is a justification for past horrible behavior. I think it's important to note that it is important why it came about, but at this point, we're not just talking about the reasons behind it. We're talking about how do we dismantle it? How do we take it apart? Sounds like you have your own ideas, Ryan. So it's maybe due to a lack of cultural variety. Sure. It could be. And Letitia's saying it's a construct, so it's not biological. So we do have other forms of racism in other countries, but in the United States, it has been shown to be a construct, something that has emerged because we had a certain system in place of keeping certain groups of people as slaves and having them work for us, right? Work for others. Okay. So perhaps cultural variety, but also it was constructed in this country and it has a really, really deep rooted history.
Oops. You didn't hear that.
Okay. Anybody else have another idea they wanted to share, or somebody was privately messaged me and I wanted to just see if I don't have to see it. So a question anonymously that came up was, my apologies, I didn't want to go there was I try to read certain books to my cousins, but they're not as interested. How do I get them engaged? It's a great question. So maybe start with what they like, of like, hey, first I'm going to read you a story that I know you like, and then I'm going to bring you a story and kind of make it a big deal. And then maybe ask them those questions. This is a whole other workshop for another day, but sometimes the questions are also about if reading is not really in their favorite things to do because they're doing other things, like especially right now, everybody's on screens, right? iPads, and reading isn't as exciting. And so make it a big deal. Like, oh my gosh, I have this really cool book, but I bet you don't want to see it because it's, no big deal. But I think it's really cool and I really want to show it to you, but I really don't think you're going to like it, right? So you kind of maybe want to make it a production, maybe put it inside of a bag and then like get it out and then try it. And then, be really animated when you read it. Like, this is a really cool book. I wonder if you're going to like it. No, I don't think you're going to like it. I don't know if that helps. If that's what we were talking about, but I don't know if that helps. Okay. So more comments back to that idea of lack of cultural diversity or a construct. Claudia is saying it's definitely a system created to keep certain people in control, right? So we aren't debating that it exists. We are saying it exists. We know that racism is happening, and we are, and this workshop is about encouraging us to not just know that it exists, but also to figure out how we can do our part as educators to work towards creating a better society so our kids don't feel that they don't have a place, right? But it also is about showing them that they do have a place in children's books and in other spaces. Okay, so I kind of wanted to end a little bit here and have you all tell us what do you think about parents? So Sabrina kind of led us to that discussion now. I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other. And I have a few more slides, but they're just really resources and questions and comments. So Sabrina asked a great question, and I wanted to see if you all wanted to help answer this as well. How do you combat racist parents who don't want their child to be exposed to anti-racist ideas or learning? I've been in a situation where that parent feeling like, as a parent, feeling like we were pushing an agenda and I don't want to expose my child to that. So I'm going to introduce you all to a word that my sister taught me recently, which is being an interrupter. So somehow, in whatever way you feel you can, interrupt it. It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel good on your end, but the outcome eventually is much better. So an example, at my children's school, my daughter's school currently, they celebrate Thanksgiving. A lot of schools do it. But apparently years ago, they celebrated it and it was everybody pick your American Indian pattern that you're going to take home and decorate and bring back. And one of the parents in our school was like, no, we're not doing this. And she brought it to the attention of the kindergarten team. She brought it to the attention of the principal, and they realized that this wasn't a good idea, that they were kind of culturally appropriating this really important cloth and using it as a kind of a prop for a child's meal. And she told me the story, and I thought it was so interesting because my experience was everybody has just a really nice feast. And I was like, this is really nice. I love that they're having a feast. And I also love that they're not decorating pilgrim and Indian hats. And one of the parents said, oh yeah, that was a whole thing a few years ago. So then I heard the backstory, right? And that parent basically just stood her ground. It was like, no, we're not doing this. This isn't right. And she called them out. She said everybody was really mad. And eventually they moved on and they don't do it anymore. So that's not always going to be easy. And it does mean you're going to have to stand up and kind of set yourself apart. And that's the hard part here. That's that uncomfortableness that Ryan was talking about before. That piece that was like, ooh, this feels weird. I don't like being the person that's standing out and saying this stuff. And it doesn't mean I don't love my teachers. And it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate everybody else's culture and where they come from. But it does mean I'm not feeling good about this. And I don't think I'm doing my part as a parent. Sabrina, I don't know if that helps, but does that make sense? Okay. Maybe in a minute she'll answer. And then, wait, I think I missed some comments. I'm so sorry. Priscilla said, nature versus nurture community is built on surrounds that for those survival techniques that lead to gaining a sense of safety. Okay. And Leticia says, lean into that uncomfortable space. Thank you. Doing the right thing is hard. It's true. It does feel uncomfortable. I'm finding my own limitations with that. Right now, this topic today, when I decided to present it, I was really worried. I was worried that some people weren't going to agree with me. And that's okay, because I think it leads to more conversation. And we're doing, thank you, Leticia. And I was afraid. I was like, am I really doing my job as an educator? Am I fighting that good fight for my kids if I'm not doing the right thing, right? So yes, thank you for saying that, for you all for saying that. Like I said, that word interrupter, I have to be an interrupter. I'm saying like, you know what, it's great that we're anti-bias. It's even better if we're anti-racist. Last and final thought for the day is, how many of you have heard of John Lewis? Well, he had that idea of getting into good trouble, right? And have you guys heard of that, that phrase before? when you get into good trouble, well, he got into good trouble by getting arrested for protesting back in the 60s. He was arrested many, many times and actually physically harmed and hurt badly in the process. And that doesn't mean that he stopped. He kept doing it until he felt like there were certain milestones reached. And so that's where I want you to think about today is how do you get yourself in good trouble? Because then you become that word, this is a weird word, accomplice, right? Someone who is going to get into trouble and commit a crime. Well, if you're getting into good trouble for this purpose, you are going to be an accomplice to the start of something really good and really important. So, Sabrina, if that's, it's okay sometimes to get into that good trouble. And sometimes it's not going to be an easy fight, but it may be an important one and one that you feel like eventually will lead to good things. Okay, a few more topics. I know we're not quite out of time yet, but I want to make sure that everybody feels like they need to take a break, they can. Okay, so Versal says, when my peers use the N-word, and I often felt odd standing up for that, what Maya Angelou said about the words we have power. Absolutely. So yeah, that's a really important point. If you don't feel like that's a word that we should all be using, or that you feel like it has a connotation that you don't feel comfortable with, then don't use it and encourage them. Why, right? What are the roots of that word? Do the roots have really important connotations, right? Or are they sending a message that, that person isn't a good person, right? Really important thing there. Ryan is saying, had a thought about, it's important that we speak about the uncomfortable topics, and therefore I have respect for those who are interrupters. Thank you. I'm glad that we got there. And yes, Leticia said that talking about it is a really important start. So sometimes you need to build an army though, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I don't mean like army, like, get out there and fight. I mean, like, you might need to have, for those of you who are feeling like you're the only one that feels that way, you might have to, find a friend that also feels the same way you do, so that you can kind of work to feed that fire together. Because if you're just that one parent that doesn't believe in it, then sometimes that doesn't do anything. But if you have other people behind you saying, yeah, you know what? Yeah, and Carmen, I totally get that. Sometimes you feel like you're a one-woman army and you may not be able to fight it alone. So it just depends on where you're at, right? If this is the school your kids have to go to, then then you kind of have your answer there, and you figure out how you can to make that work for you. If this is a school that you work for and you want to make it better, then you also kind of want to find your people that you can work with that have the same ideas as you. Oh, I love that idea. That starting a book club kind of help you get started. That's a wonderful place to start. Whether it's children's book, whether it's grown-up books, just to kind of get those conversations going. I know at some schools they have like the PTA kind of gets involved and does like a book club. For early childhood centers, you might, be that parent that wants to, or that teacher that says, hey, I think we should have like a little mini book club or a parent meeting about, how do we tackle this topic? Just having those conversations are really important. So in the time we have left, because not everybody had a chance to say something, and there were some of you that were really good at advocating for yourselves in the chat, I'd love to open it up to more open-ended questions, if you will. And especially if you haven't had a chance to say anything in the chat and you would like to.
I actually do want to say something, Doctora Cortes. This was such an amazing workshop. Thank you so much for bringing your knowledge. I actually was listening to it, and I think even for myself, I picked up on a lot of things. And I think one of them that resonates with me is one where you said this is a safe space. I don't know if I have some of my students here, and if I do, I'm so happy that you're here in this workshop. And because I have students who are aiming to become educators. And so this makes a huge difference. We want to make sure that they go into the space of education with this mindset of, being able to call it out. But when you said, this is a safe space, you can say what you need. I say that to my students most of the time. So when you said that, I was like, yeah, but what if they're not feeling safe? You don't catch, and I caught myself today. So thank you so much for that, because I say that to my students all the time. This is a safe space. You can always share with whatever you want in this space, but what if they're not feeling safe? Right. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for bringing it up. It made me kind of like think about it, and maybe allow them to say it if they have to say it, and then we'll go from there. But thank you so much. I really, to me, it was phenomenal. I appreciate it. And the books, I love them.
Well, thank you so much, Yadira. I really appreciate it. And I say that again with all due respect, because I want this to be this space where everybody feels like they can share. But I also acknowledge that some people still feel like that's just not where they're at. And
exactly.
That's okay.
And that's okay. Because we're trying so much to convey, at least for me in the classroom, that I think I can see, you can see yourself as a student, because I remember when I was a student and the things that I felt and the things that I couldn't ask. So I think I want to make sure that I bring that to my students, to be able to feel comfortable enough to ask me questions or ask me if they're not understanding the lesson. It isn't just because I'm giving the lesson doesn't mean it's right. What if it doesn't resonate with them?
Sure.
So, so you brought a lot of points that I was like, yes, exactly. But just to keep it in a mindful way, for example, like you said, yeah, I feel safe because I know I don't judge them, but they probably don't feel like that. And I can't force them, and I can't tell them individually, right? Like, oh no, you are safe. But
Right.
Thank you for that. I really do appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Does anybody have any else, other things they wanted to share?
Yeah, I want to share that, I find that it's sort of sad that we have a process for ending poor behaviors. And for lack of a better analogy, like Alcoholic Anonymous. But when it comes to racism, we're expecting people to abruptly undo all of the negative stereotypes that they have about different races, especially in the time that we live in, when if you say a racist word, it's immediate termination of a job. And sometimes that can be merited, that you have to end a person's employment. But there are other situations when someone is asking for help, saying, I'm a racist, but I have learned that being a racist has caused so many problems socially. I want to learn to change. And I don't think we have enough room to allow people to grow out of being a racist. One of the persons said, why do I need to be anti-racist? Which was a fair question. Let that person allow himself or herself to learn to grow out of it, as opposed to, we're all one, you can't be racist, and you want immediate termination of one bad habit and adoption of another one. I don't think that's fair to people who really don't see it as a problem.
What a great thought. I really appreciate that, Joe. And I couldn't have said it better. You're right. We don't have a 12-step program for this. And we don't even have a 5-step program. And I think that I see it on that level. And I also see it as a lot of the activists in this movement are really seeing it as a life or death situation. And so I see it from your perspective of it's really hard to undo those habits that are generational and that have been a part of our family, our society, our story for many, many, many years, many generations. And on the other end of it, I see it as this extreme situation where people are getting hurt, and the activists are saying this isn't okay anymore, and we need to dismantle it. And so I am not saying I'm one way or another. My point of being here is to kind of educate. The topic that was of choice was anti-bias education. And my thought process when I wrote to Renee was like, I want to do this topic, which is anti-bias or anti-racism, because I feel like that's where we're all headed. And on that part of it, I feel like we are working towards getting everybody on that train. Not everybody's getting on it very quickly, and that's okay too. We're working on it as a society. And so, but I do appreciate what you're saying, and that this is a process. And I'm working on it myself, right? There are certain things in my terminology, my vocabulary that I say all the time that I don't even think about, that I'm like, oh, that's not a word that I'm supposed to say anymore. Like this is or a phrase, this is a safe space.
Exactly.
I don't say that anymore. So we're all, I think as long as you're working towards that in the journey, I think that that's okay. So yes, there's room for learning, and our job is to educate, and hopefully nobody felt shunned in this conversation. This is more about us understanding where we're at right now and where we need to be. But thank you for sharing. And there was a few other comments in the chat that I didn't get to. Rosalba, thank you. Much needed confirmation. We just had an incident in one of our childcare centers where our teachers felt it uncomfortable to approach the situation. Instead, we had to hear it from a child involved by a parent. So we need this approach within our teaching staff. That's a really, thank you so much for that comment. Yes, it needs to be something that, you know, you have some sort of tools in order to work on. And we're not always going to be perfect the first time we do it, right? We are going to, you know, we fine tune, we kind of approach things the way that we can. I've made those mistakes myself. You know, I speak Spanish and not as fluently as others. And I've made the mistake of approaching someone and speaking to them in Spanish when I thought that they needed that, and they've been offended. And so I deeply apologize and say, I'm so sorry. Please let me know if you want me to speak to you in English or Spanish. And then they did eventually say Spanish. But at first it was this, you know, like I didn't do the right thing. And I, you know, I had a bias, or I had an idea of how I should be approaching that particular parent. So we're all on this journey. And I think as long as you're aware of it, I think that's where we start. And then you take those little steps, baby steps, if you will.
Dr. Alma, there's a very good comment actually on from Versal Mitchell. It's about, this is actually a great one.
Oh, I didn't answer your question earlier, and I apologize. I saw your question about differently abled. Will this be considered an accommodation to encourage equity among students? So I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. But I do think that as far as I know, in the community colleges, we're making a lot of movements to really, so for example, all of our videos have to be captioned, as you probably know. But we are noticing now where there was a video that we wanted to show in our college, and it didn't have screen captioning. And so we're working on trying to get more resources for our students who are who need screen captioning for vision impairments. So I think that there is a movement to try to do more for all of our students who need accommodations. That part of what this movement is doing is also, is like you said, is introducing other equity issues that we're having at a lot of levels of our of higher education. The pandemic has really brought that out in a lot of communities. It's been a really big, I think, for lack of a better word, mind-blowing. You know, these are things that I've already known about my students, that we've, you know, that everybody's has a different situation in their home. And it's been really brought into the forefront for a lot of our administrators of recognizing, like, oh wait, we should actually be giving them, you know, computers or devices, because they don't all have the resources that they need, right, when the library shut down. So I think that's also part of the work here too, at least for me, is recognizing that I'm, you know, this is just part of that journey of like being open-minded and equitable for all. I hope I answered that question. I don't think I answered it specifically for 504, but the one other thing I wanted to mention in relation to that is there's a lot of talk now about equity training, and it's controversial. So equity training then for faculty, of what does that look like? Are we forcing everybody to do it? Is it just a check mark on our list, or is it something that's really deep and meaningful? Does that make sense? I hope that answered that question. Any other questions or comments, thoughts? Abigail?
Yeah, sorry. Been juggling kids, Zooms and everything. I had asked in the chat, but I just figured I'd ask now. What are some good ways do you guys have as advising, introducing different cultural differences and practices, just so they have the exposure, but guiding kids not to turn it into like, I'm copying their speak. Like I speak a little Japanese, so I introduce that to my kids. And when I hear them try to kind of copy different things they hear, I'm like, no, let's actually learn words and learn what's being said. But I just wanted to hear from you guys, like, is there a way to kind of help guide a young child so it doesn't turn into like a mocking situation or something that could be construed in that if they, heard somebody speaking it in public and embarrassingly said, like my son has said, they don't speak like us. I'm like, don't say that. Like, let's talk. So I just wanted to hear from you guys about that, if anybody had any advice.
Just gonna wait a minute to see if anybody else had something before I jumped in.
Yeah, I had this one kid that said to me, "You are really, 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 really dark." I didn't feel that there was a need to immediately explain why. I wanted the processing to be natural. And so I said, "Really?" And then I waited to see what did her mind conjure up after that. So I think if we allow a child to have an immediate processing of what's natural for their response, then as educators, we can build upon it with factual information. My pigmentation is this color because of this, et cetera. But I think the natural beginning is what we should allow young children to have first. And then we, as educators, we build on the factual parts.
It's a great point. I'm trying to write putting something in the chat. There's a new video. I think so really quickly. You're right. The natural process of just kind of validating. And then sometimes I think it's like, okay to ask those questions. Like my children and I, when we try to speak Spanish at home, sometimes it goes really well. And sometimes they just end up imitating some of the words. So kind of what you were saying. So knowing that that's just kind of my 4-year-old son's brain and where it goes. And then also me saying, are you trying to imitate the words? And if he nods, I'll say, oh, do you want to say this? Or do you want to have your own language? And so I kind of sort of pivot it in a way so that it doesn't feel like they're making fun, if that makes sense. Because I think that's what you're getting at, is like it feels like it's sort of like derogatory. And, sometimes it's just their 4-year-old brains, 3 and 4-year-old brains kind of working in that way. So there's that. And then, but if it does kind of turn to a place where you're like, oh, that feels like it's kind of, you can say, are we, I think it's sort of like, okay to just kind of end it there. And like sometimes it's like, okay, then we're going to read a different book now. Or, you can comment on it in a way that feels like, like not shaming them, but just saying like, do you want to repeat the word or do you want me to help you? Or, so kind of going along those lines. Somebody, I thought yeah, making an effort. Abigail's on the right track. Are we talking about adults having these moments? So kids definitely need that time and redirection. Great. I had a student once in my class who he was the only non-Spanish speaker in a classroom, and after a while he would start to imitate, but he did it in respectful ways. So sometimes I think it's respectful, sometimes it's not, but he would just try to imitate the words that were spoken, and then he would say, "I'm speaking Spanglish." I think he said Spanish in a different way, but not Spanglish, but he said, "Yeah, I'm speaking it." And I was like, "Oh, are you? Tell me what you're saying." And then he would kind of get embarrassed and, and I'm like, it's okay. You're right. And then it's like, I was like, I so appreciate that you're trying, you're working on communicating. That's really helpful. So sometimes it's just the validating of that. of what they're doing and then kind of moving forward. Okay, there's a video that I wanted to share that's a brand new video from, I want to say it's from the Exchange Press that are part of our network, and I'm having a hard time copying it. Let me see if this works. Nope, it's not working. Okay, hang on. But it does show educators in action having these discussions about our differences and what they look like. Okay, it's not letting me copy it. Not really sure why. Hang on. Okay, while I'm doing that, does anybody have another comment?
I just like to add super quickly on top of the whole topic of race and such. I think it was Joe Bell that said a student had come up to them and like, oh, why are you so dark? On the flip side of that, I have a friend who goes to teach English in Japan. So it's like they've, and more often than not, this is the first foreigner that they're ever going to meet, you know? And he's had students come up to him where it's like, oh, are you made of chocolate? Because he's so dark, right? And instead of just immediately saying that it was wrong, I do think that he recognized that it was just children being children, you know? Like it was that childhood curiosity. And instead of immediately sort of having this shun, he was like, oh, do I? Am I chocolate? And he's like, well, actually, a long time ago. And then he explained in like this grand, like story way of how he got to be this dark and like the history of where he comes from. So I feel like you can also guide it in that direction as well.
That's really interesting. So they went, and I think that's the other piece too is, again, you know, when they ask us questions of, you know, like being explicit with, you know, the skin tone, right? There's, you know, there's skin tones, different skin tones. Everybody looks, you know, my skin tone is this and my skin tone is this. And my kids do that all the time. And sometimes they look at, they're like, mine is this color. And then they look at it again, they're like, wait, no, it's not. And that's okay too. Yeah, the intention, I think that's important. Sorry, somebody said something earlier. Controla, it's recommendable to teach correct children when the incident happens or after. For example, a child is asking her mother why other people look and speak differently. I also think that sometimes we try to like make it a fun story, and I think sometimes just being matter of fact of like, she speaks differently because she's from this country, and when she speaks English, she is thinking a lot about how to say things in her own home language as well as in English. Because I think that takes away also that stigma of, you know, just because you have an accent doesn't mean that you're as educated as others, right? Sometimes we get that, that we have that stigma too, that if you speak with an accent just doesn't mean that you're not trying to work just as hard to speak in another language. I think that also goes with abilities, differences, right? When you see someone who is in a wheelchair or is differently abled, you know, if a child asks you what happened, you can be, you know, frank with them. It's like, oh, they may be in a wheelchair because, you know, they need help, you know, moving. What happened to their legs? I'm not really sure. You know, we can ask them, but if we don't know them, it might feel uncomfortable. So maybe we get to know them, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that helps. But I think sometimes it's like you said, it's talking about it when it happens. So this happens also with my kids. We're in this interesting part of the year, right? We're right before Mother's Day and right before Father's Day, where everybody's talking about Mother's Day and Father's Day. And in my class, in my son's class, there are two children that have either one father or two fathers, but no mothers, and by choice. And so my son was like, I was like, what about so-and-so? When I'm trying to be, you know, have that conversation about being inclusive. What about that kid in your class? Is she celebrating it? And he's like, oh. It's like, but does she have, and so we've been talking about people that raise you, people that live at home with you, and how those are really important people, and how just because you don't have a mother that lives in your home doesn't mean that you are not loved, right? So I know that this is a workshop about anti-bias education and or anti-racist, but we're also thinking about the inclusivity of those things, right? And how do you have those conversations with your kids that might be a little bit difficult, but also raise awareness. And I think that's also what we're talking about here. It's just like, how do you raise awareness in your own life? Another comment that I think is directed at me that I just want to share really quick about someone saying the beauty of speaking Spanish and having a Mexican culture and how it set aside pride in yourself. But unfortunately, when my teacher told me I needed to speak, I needed speech class, and now I can't speak Spanish well. So that's another piece altogether, right? Is that sometimes, like I said before, when you meet other people, we don't really honor where they're coming from. So that was also part of the message of our anti-bias education, was about honoring those differences and being okay with it. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. I believe that up until about 4 years ago, California was an English-only state. Does everybody know that? Yeah. And so I believe there's now a movement to have California be more of a bilingual state. So we're reaching kind of a different level of equity now. It's taken us quite some time, and we had 20, 30 years of English only, unfortunately, even though there is no national language in the United States. So I'm really sorry to hear that the student has that situation where they don't feel like they speak Spanish as well. And I think that happens to a lot of people, unfortunately. So but hopefully, you know, you won't do that with the students that you work with or with any children that you have, if you decide that. Why does it need to be labeled? Claudia, can you tell me more what you mean by that? Why was it English only? It was a law that was passed.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to know, like, why does it have to be labeled? Like, it's an English state only. Like, I just think it's, yeah, like, I feel like it goes against, I guess, the democracy thing, because like some people like are immigrants and they don't speak English. So I feel like that's kind of contradictory, like, to say that.
That was the whole point. To put it bluntly, that was the whole point. Is that we were, this was a movement that was meant to kind of other people, and that it should, yes, thank you, Leticia. Students were punished for not speaking English in the classroom. So even though we were a strong country of students that were coming from, or not students, of children that were coming from other parts of the world, namely south of the border, there was a movement to have an English only state so that children could not speak Spanish in their classrooms unless they were in English as a second language classrooms. So it was very, again, these are just the different ways that we other people in this, in our country, but in the state. We're not the only state that did it, but it was a very long history. I was actually got into trouble for speaking Spanish to the kids in my class, that I felt like they strongly needed it. And I was working on helping them to learn English, but they needed that Spanish first. And I was advised that I was not supposed to do that. So that was interesting. I didn't ever get like fined or anything like that, but I was just kind of, like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. It's not okay. And I was like, but my kids don't understand anything I'm saying, and I can speak the language. So anyways, yes, and even parents wouldn't teach their children their native language to avoid discrimination. Yeah, we have a long history of that in our country. That happened with my parents as well. So we are reaching 2 o'clock. I know that we have 10 minutes. I want to make sure that everybody has what they need. If you're asking me to privately message you the PowerPoint or presentation, I believe I will be, everybody will get their certificates at a certain point, but you don't need to privately message me. As long as you were in the chat and you said your name and your institution, I will be able to send you out the PowerPoint and all the links at a certain point. Okay. Any final thoughts that anybody has? I really appreciate the conversation today, and I appreciate you all being here. I'm going to just show you my last slide so that you have my information as we end today. And I will stay on for just a few more minutes and make sure everybody has what they need. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all so much for this. I really appreciated meeting you all and sharing with you all today. Thank you. Thank you, Carmina. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Brenda and Eileen, and Florencia, and Leticia, and Donna, and Natalia, and Carolina. Thank you, and Mita, and Natalia again, and Heba, Eva, and Sabrina, and Sam. Thank you, and Vanessa. Thank you all so much. And Lynn and Claudia.
Hey, Professor Alma. I'm not sure if this is appropriate for me to ask you right now, but how can I ask you for proof that I attended this conference? I'm not sure if you already received my message, so that's why I'm taking a leave right now.
I was just commenting on it that I'm going to be sending it out to people once I take attendance. I don't send it out right away. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I'm going to stop recording.